Peace, family. Good morning. Oh, let me take this down. My bad. 1 second. There we go. Peace, family. Good morning. Welcome to We Charge Colonialism TV and African Esquire TV show on this channel. I hope you all are doing well. Let me know if you hear me okay. Checking the comment section. So, everyone, we're going to be talking about some interesting things, particularly for Africans in America, but this also extends to the diaspora. And that is how we are being manipulated and how we have been manipulated by the people many times who say that they are our friends. I think many of us, if you watch this channel or many other channels, you're probably aware that this is something that has been the case for a long time for many Africans. You're probably aware of the Democratic Party being one of the main arbitrators of this, and previous to this, before there was a shift as far as ideology, it was the Republican Party who used to do this. If you don't know, at one time in history, the Republican Party was essentially the party that was more associated with trying to appeal to the Africans. And at that time, it was more so Africans in the South. So things have still remained the same. And I think we have to start being very careful as a community before we jump on certain issues. Whenever we see a certain narrative being repeated over and over and over again inside of mainstream news, we have to be very suspicious. Thank you, brother Black Lion, thank you so much for letting me know I'm coming through clearly. I have to ask because, you know, I've started videos before not even knowing I was muted or something like that. So thank you for the feedback. But yeah, so we have to be very clear about this, because the issue is that we have enemies, and then we have main enemies, and we have enemies that should be a priority, and we have enemies that should not be a priority. And that's hard for us to hear sometimes, because we think that we can fight every single person whose interest is against our interest at the same time. That's not common sense. If you know anything about who your main arbitrator of your oppression is, that force has to have all of your energy. And then from there, you can have more focus on other type of sub-issues. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about it in light of two recent events. January 6th, there was, if you don't recall, insurrection, quote unquote. That's what they've been calling it, as far as some people who were right-leaning, who basically infiltrated the U.S. Capitol. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk briefly about this debate on critical race theory. A lot of people have been jumping on that. And we're going to relate it to Abraham Lincoln and his signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, all for the point of saying that we have to be very careful as a community whenever we jump on certain issues. So before we get started, I do want to just do some quick announcements. So you all seen, if you watched the promo, our convention, AUMD, Africa Unity Movement for Decolonization, we have registration still open. The convention is in July 21st through 23rd. Please register for that. I'm actually going to show you our website, wechargecolonialism.org, in case anyone has not been there yet. I hope you've been there by now. But there's two things I want to show you on our website. So going back to AUMD, you can register right here. You can read the declaration. This is, again, a declaration against the colonial system. We break down neo-colonialism. We break down internal colonialism. We break down settler colonialism. So it's really in depth right here. We're going to switch formats from this to a Google Doc at the end of this month, but you can still read it here for now. And then also you'll find the link to register for the convention right here. The cost is only $35. I'm sorry, $35 now, because it increased because pre-registration is over. So $35 if you are inside of the global north, that is US, Europe, and it's going to be $25 now for if you're inside of the global south. And again, if you don't see, we have really great speakers. I mean, you know, many of these people I'm sure you recognize, some very prominent voices. And the whole purpose of the convention is Pan-African unity or perish, a call to abolish neocolonialism. And I hope if you are African of African descent, you understand neocolonialism is something that must end if we're going to survive as a people. So I just want to highlight that. And then also going back to the website, if you go to this tab right here, this is the Black Power Fund. This is a giveaway sweepstakes that WCC is having. This is our first ever. You could register for it if you are an organizer and let's say you want to start a community garden or a food pantry or something where you want to feed the people. This is our first theme for this. It's Africans Return to the Soil. We're giving away $500. Now, there's a $10 registration fee because we want to keep the project going so that we can continue to give more for our people. And, you know, it's something small, obviously, but something that can go a long way. But you can register for that right here. And again, it's only $10 to register for the $500 sweepstakes. And that will, we hope to basically have a decision by March. I just also want to add in that this is international. So $500, you know, it's could be big in the US. It could be very big if you're in the continent or if you're in the Caribbean. So anywhere you are, you know, as long as you're an organizer, you have an organization already, you know, we have to make sure we're giving it to someone who's actually going to do right with the money. That's our primary concern. So everyone, let's get started with this topic. We're going to first start by talking about the issue that I brought up in the beginning. The issue I brought up was that we have a number one enemy. So politically, ideologically, if you are a Black nationalists are people who believe that African people, Black people, particularly in the United States is the context we're talking about now, but this is also, it could be a Black nationalist in Europe, you could be a Black nationalist inside of Africa, wherever. Your belief is that African people should control the economics, the social institutions, and the political institutions in your community. Now, that belief comes comes into conflict with a certain system. That system is the system of globalization. Globalization is this idea that the world economy is global, that anyone can participate, that it's for everyone. And of course, this only works one way. It only works in a way that benefits Europe, the United States, and more you're starting to see more globalists come and start benefiting from this system, particularly China. So this is a system that has been in place since at least the transatlantic slave trade. If you think about what happened, Africans being taken from Africa to be shipped all over the world, whether it was inside of Europe, whether it was in the United States, or at that time it was colonies, and whether it was also throughout the Caribbean, we were transported globally. This was globalism. This was our first encounter with globalism. Not to say that we've never traveled outside of Africa, but as far as a global system being intact, that is the system that we faced at that time. If you're a Pan-Africanist, you also are in conflict with this system. No, it's not just Black nationalists who are in conflict with this system, because the idea of Black nationalism is that African people, you be able to control your own communities. Well, that's impossible if someone else from the outside is controlling you. Similarly, if your idea of liberation is that African people should unite globally, if that's your understanding of liberation, then that also comes into conflict with the globalists, because in their mind, Africa is not for the African. Marcus Garvey came out, he said, Africa for Africans. Well, globalists would say Africa for the world. Essentially, if you think about how the world economy is run, many of the resources that are the batteries that keep this thing going are coming right directly from Africa. Much of the labor, more and more, is coming from Africa. So if you think about Africa for the Africans, a Pan-Africanist view, or even that African people globally should be united for our mutual benefit, that comes into direct conflict with globalism, because globalism says that no, you're not for yourself, you're for all of us. Now, I'm trying to get you to see that our primary enemies, the people who have the biggest interest in keeping us separated, the people who have the most drastic interest in keeping us enslaved, those are the globalists. Or when I say globalists, I mean the global capitalists. Because essentially, if Pan-Africanism, if Black nationalism, if these concepts are realized, it's going to directly affect them in their ability to continue to pillage our communities, continue to control us, and continue to have power inside of the globe. Now, I hope that you see those are our main enemies. Our main enemies are the global capitalists. First primary enemy is the global capitalists. And yet many of us, we are told by the mainstream news that that's not our global enemy and it's our main enemy. Instead, we are told to direct our attention elsewhere. Now, let me first say, when we're talking about the Southern white conservative, many of us would see those people as our enemies. In many ways, they would be our enemies. They are our enemies in many ways. Ideologically, we could say that a lot of these people are enemies. So, for example, many of them believe in this concept of the white man's burden, or of the white man. He has a right to these lands. Obviously, we are indigenous people, so we stand in solidarity with indigenous Americans. And at the same time, we understand that this land was not just stolen, but it could not have been developed in the way that it was without our labor. So we have no pride in the beginning of these United States. We have no pride, many of us, inside of this Constitution. We have no pride, we have no admiration of the powers who ruled us from the beginning, whereas these people glorify them. Many of them glorify the Confederacy, many of them glorify slavery. There are other ways that we have conflicting interests. They're in their mindset, they have to basically overcome us in the U.S. because otherwise, their labor is not going to be prized, because many of these people are not just poor, are basically poor whites. And therefore we become a competition. So they have to find ways to suppress us in order to ensure that their power is going to be solidified. This is another way that we can come into conflict, and historically it has happened. For example, a lot of lynchings were for the fact that Africans would start exercising economic power. And when that economic power was a threat to their power, then they had to find a way to quell that. So that's another way. But if we think about these ways that we have opposing interest versus our opposing interest to the globalists, we also can see that they're kind of small fish. I mean, they're low level hanging fish. There's still people who we have to be prepared to defend ourselves against. There's still people we have to be prepared to fend off, and there's still people who we understand are opposed to us in many ways. But as far as our primary enemy cannot be the low level, poor, or disenfranchised, or not disenfranchised, not as enfranchised as the white elites. Those cannot be our primary enemies. Our primary enemies have to be the ones colonizing us. Our primary enemies have to be the ones who are looting our lands. Our primary enemies have to be the ones who are going to Davos and making these year plans where they're saying that, okay, we're going to do this with Africa and this with Africa. Those are our primary enemies. Now, how is it that the globalists deals with the fact that they understand we are their enemy? Again, if you're a Pan-Africanist, if you're a Black nationalist, if you believe in liberation, you are an enemy to the globalists. And they also see these white Southerners, and not all Southerners, these white conservatives, these white people who might be considered alt-right or whatever. And they see them also as a possible threat, because many of these same people are disenchanted with the elite. Many of them also do not like the power that Wall Street has. Many of them are critical of like the Federal Reserve, things like that. So they see these two groups who are opposing their globalist capitalist agenda. And the way that they deal with us is to basically pit us against each other. Therefore, we'll be so busy fighting these low-hanging fruit. We'll be so busy fighting these low income, these alt-right or whatever conservatives. We'll be so busy fighting them. Meanwhile, the globalist is able to freely dominate us, freely exercise their power, freely go into Africa and take things, or freely go into our communities and raid us for our bodies. They'll be able to do those things because we'll be so busy trying to fight off the white supremacists. So what I'm trying to get you to see is that there are agendas being made that affect Africans globally. And while we are so focused on the people who the media identifies as being our primary enemy, the ones who actually are our primary enemies, the ones who actually yield the power, those people are running loose, free of checks. I mean, who has checked these people? Who has checked these people ever? We don't have any way to check them because we're too busy checking these, again, low-hanging fruit. So I hope that I got you to at least waking up to the concept that we're going to deal with in this video. We're going to deal with some specific examples of how the mainstream media, which is controlled by the globalists, we're talking about CNN, we're talking about MSNBC, New York Times, these mainstream media entities are pushing our issues and telling us that these are our issues that we should be concerned with. So essentially, they're going out there and saying, hey, Black people, don't focus on, what's going on over in Davos. Don't focus on what's going over in the United Nations. Focus on these issues. And they do that because, number one, these issues make no difference to their power. No difference at all. This is something they do all the time. Also, in addition, these issues will keep us fighting the other people who they've identified as having conflicted interests with them. So we're going to talk about that in this video. Again, we're going to talk about January 6th. We're going to talk about the critical race theory portion. We're also going to relate this to the Civil War with Abraham Lincoln. But before we get to there, I do want to go through some African news, a Pan-Africanist channel, and therefore we have to always make sure that we're keeping up with what's going on. And I'm sure you all know there's been some interesting things going on inside of the continent. So let's talk about these topics right now. All right, everyone. So let's start with the big story. I'm sure many of you are paying attention to this happening right now. So we're going to show my screen real quick. The ECOWAS are being blamed for the unrest in Burkina Faso. I'm sure many of you are aware, Burkina Faso, a country that many of us might pay special attention to because of the legacy with Thomas Sankara. There was a coup in Burkina Faso that was reported. And this is coming at a time that is very, very difficult for the regional West African bloc called the ECOWAS. The ECOWAS are a neo-colonial institution essentially controlled by the globalists, controlled by the United Nations, controlled by the European Union. Essentially, those are the overseers in the West African region. They're told what to do and they do it. And these people were already facing two coups. There was a recent coup in Mali and then Guinea. Now, these two coups have had them scrambling to try to reassert power, reassert dominance inside of the region because they know that their neo-colonial masters are not going to tolerate these types of uprisings. And so they've been trying to reassert dominance. What's happened instead, though, is that there's been another country that's been added to the roster, and that is Burkina Faso. So let's just talk very briefly. It says, economic community of West African states has been partly blamed for the current unrest in Burkina Faso and other parts of the Sahel region. So let's also keep in mind the Sahel region, like these things that are happening. This is Francophone countries. And so there's something specific happening with people who were colonized by France and who France continues to colonize through different policies. And that is a awakening of the African masses, a clear identification. That's kind of the difficulty with neocolonialism, is that we have difficulty identifying who our oppressor is because you have this Black person, this African face that's saying, hey, I'm your leader, I'm your president. So if you're our president, then you must be our enemy. It must be you. It must be because you're corrupt. Meanwhile, these white entities, these business interests are in the back or behind the scenes. Now, as for the French, it's been clearly identified that these people are in fact the ones who are behind the scene. And this is something that's powerful for all of us to take note of, that we have to all be identifying who our correct oppressors are. So now it's blamed on the ECOWAS, like I said. And a part of it is because the ECOWAS has been seen as weak. They've been unable to bring Mali back into compliance, and they've been unable to bring Guinea back into compliance. Scrolling down, so before this attempted coup in Burkina Faso, there'd been successful coups in Chad, Mali, Guinea, and I forgot about Chad, all Francophone countries, right? And failed military takeovers in Niger and Sudan. And it says that a study by two U.S. researchers, Jonathan Powell and Clayton Tyne, has identified over 200 such attempts in Africa since the late 1950s. And this is something that's very telling. And the fact that post-colonialism, Africa has never been peaceful. because we know Africa is still being colonized, yet the narrative is that Africa is free and Africa is independent. But continually, the continent is seeing coups and seeing uprisings because the people have just had enough. Now, I want to also go down a little further. So African Union has released communication. African Union is also being viewed as weak, but they said that there should be strategic plan if foreign occupations really want to help the local forces to be able to fight these terrorists. So basically what's happening is that this whole conflict is being based on Islamicist insurgency. And that's part of the way that ECOWAS is basically taking on the blame. So essentially, why aren't you doing more as a regional body to overcome these entities? Now, it should be understood that France has been the one militarily that's been in the region, and the people are blaming France and also their governments that are being sponsored by France for the fact that there's been an increase in insurgency. But I think also that we have to understand insurgency is kind of the way that the West has justified occupation of African countries. The main issue that we see the people voicing is that they no longer want to be associated with these French entities, the French colonial states. And of course, this leaves Macron more and more scrambling. This leaves the European Union, the United Nations, and now the African Union and ECOWAS inside of a position where they're also scrambling. So we should keep watch, make sure that we are being optimistic as far as what is the agenda of this junta, but this is not the ideal situation. The ideal situation would be the people to be organized, the people to have an uprising, and the people to push their despots out of power. That way, that the organizational structure that replaces the military junta is one that's going to change the landscape. We should remember that Thomas Sankara was killed by Blaise Compaoré, and he became the president of Burkina Faso. He was ousted in 2014 when there was a coup. But guess what? After the coup, things went right back to normal. France still maintained dominance. So we want to see a different change and a shift, and that's going to take revolutionary things happening. So let's go over to another story I wanted to share with you all happening in Africa. So Forbes magazine just released a list of the richest, Africa's richest billionaires list of 2022. Now, it should be noted, obviously, there's in the picture, there's one person who's African and there's two Europeans. So we can see how that's going. Now, they said Africa's billionaires are richer than they have been in years. Keep in mind, this is during the coronavirus pandemic, and many Africans are struggling more than they have in years. Despite the global pandemic, as a group, the continent's 18 billionaires are worth an estimated $84.9 billion, a 15% increase from 12 months ago, and the most since 2014, when a larger number of billionaires, 28, were worth a combined of $96.5 billion. Now, we should know, obviously, in comparison to Europe, this is not that huge, but in comparison to the average African, it's absolutely huge. There's a class of middlemen who basically are trying to keep the system in place because they understand that they're getting something out of it. It might not be as much as Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates, but they're getting something that makes them want to fight for the maintenance of this colonial entity. They go ahead and list some of the people. One is Nigeria, continent's richest person. He's worth an estimated $13.9 billion, up from $12.1 billion last year. $13.9 billion, one person worth that in Nigeria. And there's people in Nigeria who are living on cents a day. This is the horrific reality of capitalism in Africa. And people who say, well, socialism, communalism, those things don't work. How is capitalism working? How is this working when you have one individual inside of a country where people are living on cents a day, and one single person is worth $13.9 billion? That's what they're offering to us. That's what the West is offering to us, but we should want better for ourselves. Now, you should read through the whole article. In fact, let me make sure I post it in the description now. But I want to just let you see this chart so that you can see that despite the pandemic, the billionaires inside of Africa have made more this past year than in past times. What does that mean whenever you as a people What does that mean when you as a people are dealing with the discrepancy in wealth? What does that mean whenever you have a certain class of people who are doing better inside of a global catastrophe? That means that those people are not a part of you. We should understand that there's separate entities working at the same time. Masses of Africans, we're a part of the global South, right? We're the disenfranchised, we're the landless people, we're the people who are occupied by on all sides. Meanwhile, on the other side, you have these people who I would say are just as much a part of the system, even though they're maybe the lesser part of the system, but there's just as much part of the system. So whenever there's people suffering in mass, there's always going to be the system that actually doesn't suffer, that does better. And that's what's happening right now with these billionaires inside of Africa. They're not a part of us. They're not of us. But the tragic thing is, despite the fact that they're not a part of us and they're not of us and they're separate from us, they're still going to be paraded around as being an African success story. We've seen this so many times with the Kanjo Iweala inside of the WTO. She's being paraded around as a success story, but she's not of us. She's not a part of us. These billionaires, they're the ones who go and they say, hey, Africa is successful. Africa is this. Africa is developed. But you're not a part of us. You're not dealing with the everyday realities that Africans are dealing with. Instead, you're a part of the colonial, the globalist system. So we should identify that our interests are not in line with these people. And then the last story that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to share the link to this story because one, actually, it's one of those things that I think you have to click it the first time so that you can actually read it. I'm going to read from the story on my other screen because I was able to copy it and still be able to read just excerpts from it. But if you remember last week, we talked about the global or the one world order, new world order, liberal world order. They have so many names for it. And one thing that I had said is that a big thing when it comes to Russia and China is that the United States is not necessarily trying to not trying to go at China necessarily just because they want to necessarily recolonize them. It's more like they see China and they see Russia and they see that they are basically establishing something that could rob the United States and the European allies of having a stronghold on power inside of the African continent. So this story actually says, and this is the funny thing, like if you say New World Order, or if you put it like in your title on YouTube or whatever, automatically you'll get this like disclaimer, or you'll get like a link to Wikipedia for full context. But the imperialists will use this same term. That's the thing that I can never get my mind around. Like, how is this a conspiracy where you will use this same term anytime that you want to use it? So this is for Foreign Policy Magazine, I believe. And they have an article. The title of the article is Russia and China Plans a New World Order. Again, this is like an imperialist entity. These are people who do not have any like love for, they love capitalism. They love the current system, the Western imperialist system. And they said that Russia and China have plans for a new world order. Just going to read through just a few parts of this article that I want you to take note of, that they're saying that two features of the current world order that Russians and the Chinese frequently object to are unipolarity and universality. Put more simply, they believe that the current arrangements give America too much power, and they are determined to change that. So that is good, right? Is that America should not have too much power. But understand, the way that this is being phrased, that this is a threat to everyone everywhere, because this really weird hubris has been developed inside of the minds of many people, even many of our people. We would much rather America be the one in control of our destinies than have anyone else like China or Russia. Now, we should ultimately want no one in control of our destinies except for us. We should want us to be able to have power and have sovereignty to be able to plan our own systems. That should be our goal. And yet we are being told that that's not what we should aspire to. America, we've seen America for a long time. Therefore, be comfortable with your current colonizer. The article goes on to say that for Russia and China, the making of a new world order is not simply a matter of raw power. It is a battle of ideas. While the Western liberal tradition promotes the idea of universal human rights, Russian and Chinese thinkers make the argument that different cultural traditions and civilizations should be allowed to develop in different ways. And that's something that we've identified many times on this channel. I'm not someone who wants China like going in Africa, making these deals with these neo-colonial puppets, and I'm gonna say, oh, it's good because it's not America. I don't take that position. To me, the system of neocolonialism has to be derailed completely. And that means that these governments that are making these deals on our behalf are not legitimate. That being the case, though, the difference that we see consistently is that Russia and China, they don't care what your culture is. At least for now, they don't care. They don't have a goal to push their culture on Africans. And that's one thing that the West does. They have to not just come in and bribe your leaders. They have to bribe your leaders, or not bribe your leaders. They don't have to just come in and come in and make deals with your leaders. They have to come in, make these hidden secret deals. Actually, it is a bribe if you actually understand the economic hitman thing. They go in and bribe your leaders, and then they want to civilize you. So they have to teach you how to talk like them, and teach you how to dress like them, teach you that your culture is inferior and that you should adopt our culture, and that your aspirations are inferior. You should aspire to what we aspire to. That's very different from what we see with China and Russia. And that's something that even inside of this magazine, they're identifying. Just to read on, the New World Order that Russia and China are demanding would instead be based on distinct spheres of influence. The U.S. would accept Russia and Chinese dominion of their neighbors and would abandon its support for democracy or color revolutions that might threaten Putin or Xi. Is that how you say the Chinese president's name? Someone can let me know. Xi. The crisis over Ukraine is a struggle over the future world order because it turns on precisely these issues. I'm going to end off with this paragraph. For the U.S., these demands violate some basic principles of the current world order, in particular, the right of an independent country to define its own foreign policy and strategic choices. That's BS, obviously. We know that the United States is more invested in this and to ensure that their power is not threatened or questioned. Because if Russia does invade Ukraine and Ukraine is a U.S. ally, that's a huge, huge smack in the face of United States imperialism and the idea that it will continue into this 20th century. So I just want us to understand and be clear. What is it that these globalists are pushing for? What is it that the interest is? And be very clear that Russia and China, U.S., they're basically fighting for who's going to be the one to dominate the world order. So with that, we're going to get back into our previous topic, how we are being used by these globalists and how we're basically being pitted against the wrong people. We need to be focused on who our actual enemies are. Okay, so we're back. Now, when I was in college, I had a professor, this professor, Dr. Matabananza. He was, I don't remember which country, he was from an African country, and it was an African-American history class. He made sure that we understood one big principle. It was that President Abraham Lincoln was a racist. Literally every single day that he would come into the classroom, he would start off the class session by saying, Lincoln is a racist, and then he'd go through a number of other things that he would say, but he wanted to drill this into our heads. And we thought it was funny at the time, but I understand completely why. Because if you go by the not just the commonly held notion, the institutionalized narrative. So we should understand it's one thing that people just have an idea of what happened. It's another thing when the institutions from the school system to the government, they recognize something that's not true as true. So we have to be very clear on who our enemies are. Now, Lincoln was a racist, if you don't know, despite the fact that he's the same person that, quote unquote, emancipated us. And we know that's not true. But he was a racist prior to becoming president. He's many times written about how he believes that African people were inferior. And he really used us to the utmost degree if you understand what happened in the Civil War. Now, why do we have to talk about this now? Because the same thing's being done to our people. These people who are being told, we're being told are our liberators. Isn't that what Joe Biden does, or what who else when Hillary Clinton does? Anytime that there's a white liberal or just liberal period who's told to be the next president, we have to not just look at them as someone who's running for our vote. We have to look at them as our liberators. That's what Joe Biden basically poised himself as. Trump was the white supremacist neo-Nazi. That's what they wanted us to believe, and that Joe Biden was going to liberate us from being under his tyranny. That's what they told us. That's not true. I want to just read from this. Many of you, I'm sure, know this, but let's just talk about it again when it comes to what happened in the Civil War. Now, of course, many people think that the Civil War was about slavery. Many of us know that that's not the case. It was really about maintaining the union of the United States. The South wanted to leave, and Lincoln says, no, you're not going to leave. You're going to stay with us. This is a quote from Abraham Lincoln. He wrote in August of 1962, if there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time save slavery, I do not agree with them. If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time destroy slavery, I do not agree with them. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. What I do about slavery in the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union. And what I forbear because I do not believe it would help to save the Union. Now, this is the same person that many of us will go to events. It's almost Black History Month, right? We'll go to Black History Month events. We'll stand next to his picture and say, "Oh, this is a great liberator." We'll go to the Washington Memorial or the Lincoln Memorial. We'll say, "Oh my gosh, this great man, Abraham Lincoln." We'll go to these pageants. Like this man has this sainthood basically inside of America as being a liberator. This man directly says, I would not do it. I would only free enslaved Africans to use them for the purpose of the United States. I would not do it for any other reason. Now, this creates a problem if you think about it. Just 1 month later, in September 1962, he just says, I'm not going to do this because I care about Africans. I'm doing this literally because I want to save the Union. Just 1 month later, this same man, he thank you, Catalina. I don't know how to pronounce Xi Jinping. That's the Chinese president's name. This 1 month later, this same man is going to release the Emancipation Proclamation. 1 month after he says, I do not care about Africans. 1 month after he says, I wouldn't do it unless it was for the Union. So what changed? Well, Lincoln identified some things. One, he identified that he could use Africans. One, he was expecting two things to happen after the Emancipation Proclamation. He was expecting either enslaved Africans would start rebelling because the United States, of course, the North was at war with the South, and they were losing at this point. He said, okay, if we tell these Africans that we're going to free you, maybe they'll rebel against the white slaveholders, and that will be more of a boost for us to actually win the war. And number two, he allowed for these Africans to join the Union Army. The idea is that we're getting our tails whipped, let's get some more help. This was not for our freedom, though. In fact, we all know the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free one person. It literally only applied to Southern states, and there were no enslaved Africans inside of the South at this time. Yet he used us, and he gets now to be used to this day as a symbol of emancipation and liberation. Now, if I may tell you something, our people have not learned our lesson. Many of us have not learned our lesson from these types of debacles, because even inside of the Emancipation Proclamation, many of our people signed up for the Union Army. Now, I'm not saying that was wrong, obviously. Like, if had the South won, we don't know what could have happened. Many of us could have still been slaves to this day. We don't know what would have happened. But many of them basically did what he thought they would do. They signed up for the Union Army, and they became an asset to someone who had no love for them. But unfortunately, regardless of if the Emancipation Proclamation went through or not, our people would still be enslaved. Our people would still be in chains. We did not win our freedom. The freedom was given as a compromise. It was always a compromise, because they said, okay, we'll let you be free so long as you don't commit a crime. This is why they say, if you are not the one who is winning your freedom, if you're not the one who's accomplishing it and not someone giving it to you, it's never going to be full freedom. That's our problem with the United States, Africans in the United States, and Africans globally. I don't know of one African people, save Zimbabwe, that has actually won its freedom and independence on their own accord. It's always been granted to us by those who are basically oppressing us, and of course it's never going to be a full freedom for that reason. Now, if you all were paying attention to something that happened recently, I'm going to relate this again to January 6th. It was reported that the FBI may have infiltrated January 6th, and I want you to question for yourself why. Why would the Federal Bureau of Investigation infiltrate something that could have possibly led to the overtake of a capital, could have led to politicians of this state being killed? Now, let me not, give you a conspiracy. Let me just let you listen to this yourself. I'm going to play a quick video so that you can see what I'm talking about. Okay.
For the January 6th Capitol riot, and was seen on the day, January 6th, ushering crowds into the Capitol building, has been identified by law enforcement as Arizona resident Ray Epps.
Ray Epps, an Arizona man seen in widely circulated videos telling Trump supporters on multiple occasions to go into the Capitol, also seemed to have acted on his own.
I don't even like to say it because I'll be arrested.
Well, let's not say
we need to go. I'll say it. All right. We need to go in to the Capitol.
Now y'all heard this. This man has literally says we need to go into the Capitol. I don't think this video shows it, but whenever he was going around telling people and these are the Trump people, right? These are the people this is many of our enemies, our worst enemy, Trump people. Oh my gosh. So this man is going around telling people, hey, we need to go into the Capitol. We need to go into the Capitol. And even some of those people around were like yelling, Fed, 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 because who would say that, right? Especially in DC.
Let's go!
Same man again at the front, like we're about to enter the Capitol. Same man who told them, let's go into the Capitol.
Unsurprisingly, he was on the FBI's most wanted list and was referred to as Suspect 16 for some time.
FBI WFO is seeking the public's assistance in identifying those who made unlawful entry into the US Capitol building on January the 6th.
But now, Suspect 16 has been scrubbed from the FBI website. Now, if you take a look at the Wayback Machine from archive.org, you can see that from January 8, 2021, all the way until June 30th, Suspect 16 was pretty clearly highlighted. But suddenly, on July 1st, he wasn't on the website any longer.
So this is true. This is real life. This is not guessing. There was someone who is seen on video telling people to enter into the Capitol. This same person is yelled at, called a Fed. This same person identified on the FBI website and shortly after just magically disappears. Now, maybe, we're just guessing things because CNN is calling this a conspiracy, right? Maybe we're just guessing things. Maybe the FBI didn't have anything to do with this. But the response is even more concerning. I want to show you all this video right here. This is the assistant director of the FBI being questioned about January 6th, right?
FBI agents or confidential informants acting to the FBI. How many FBI agents or confidential informants actively participated in the events of January 6th?
Sir, I'm sure you can appreciate that I can't go into the specifics of sources and methods.
Did any FBI agents or confidential informants actively participate in the events of January 6th? Yes or no?
Sir, I can't answer that.
Did any?
You can't answer whether or not any FBI agents actively were participating in January 6th.
FBI agents or confidential informants commit crimes of violence on January 6th.
I can't answer that, sir.
Did any FBI agents or FBI informants actively encourage and incite crimes of violence on January 6th?
Sir, I can't answer that.
Literally, in front of the entire world, and the crazy thing is that mainstream media is like really like trying to avoid this one. In front of the entire world, the FBI cannot say whether their own people were doing acts of violence on January 6th. Okay.
Ms. Sadburn, who is Ray Epps?
And Ray Epps is the man who we just showed who's believed to be an FBI agent. Yes. Who is Ray Epps?
I'm aware of the individual, sir. I don't have the specific background to him.
Well, there are a lot of people who are understandably very concerned about Mr. Epps. On the night of January 5th, 2021, Epps wandered around the crowd that had gathered. And there's video out there of him chanting, "Tomorrow, we need to get into the Capitol, into the Capitol." This was strange behavior, so strange that the crowd began chanting, "Fed, Fed, 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 Fed." Ms. Sandburn, was Ray Epps a Fed?
Sir, I cannot answer that question.
The next day, on January 6th, Mr. Epps is seen whispering to a person, and 5 seconds later, 5 seconds after he's whispering to a person, that same person begins to forcibly tear down the barricades. Did Mr. Epps urge them to tear down the barricades?
Sir,
she can't answer that. This is real life. Again, I'm not saying what I'm not saying anything that you didn't see for yourself. You've seen, this is Congress. It's a congressional hearing. I'm not making anything up. This really happened. So, of course, we have to question, did the FBI infiltrate January 6th? The question would have to make us also ask the question, if they did infiltrate at January 6th, why? Why would the Federal Bureau of Investigation want for there to be a uprising inside of the United States? Like, why would they want for Trump's people to rush the Capitol building? I'll leave it up to you to ask this question. Of course, this is all, you might say, well, this is pretty damning to me, but maybe you say this is still circumstantial evidence. Well, let's talk about some things that happened after January 6th, because to me, the thing that happens whenever there's these huge catastrophes, right, is that right after there are laws being passed. Unfortunately, many of our people were so concerned about what happened, or we're concerned about we're concerned about talking about the issue. So if you watch, I have to say CNN because it's like it's on in my house a lot, not because I watch it. Constantly talking about the incident, but not talking about what's being done behind the scenes after the incident. I want to show you some things that will make you look at this, I think, a little differently. Because what the FBI could have been doing, what I would suggest they were doing, is something that was going to lead to a clampdown on power. And that's literally what we've seen happen in the aftermath. So I'm going to show you an article. It says, Biden is expanding Trump's war on domestic violent extremism. Yes, Joe Biden expanding Trump's war on domestic violent extremism. And the funny thing is, whenever the Black identity extremist thing came out, I mean, there were some think pieces that could go on and on and on about this, how it's dangerous and, you know, how everyone has to pay attention. But Biden's expanding of these programs, no one's paying attention. So we're going to scroll down some. Because I think it's more so going into a narrative. I just want to get to the facts of what has been happening. Federal prosecutors with the U.S. District Court for, actually, let me go down a little bit more. Okay, here we go. Under President Joe Biden, cases involving violations of this civil disorder have been overseen by the Justice Department's counterterrorism section. In the first month of Biden's presidency, the department was faced with the January 6th Capitol attack, and the anti-riot law proved useful in those prosecutions. 163 people of 570 Capitol defenders prosecuted at the federal level were charged with civil disorder offenses between January and August, along with an array of others, according to data. Now, when the Justice Department began prosecuting protesters and other participants in civil unrest last year, public defenders and former U.S. attorneys said that such charging of property offenses and looting was unprecedented because cases would generally be handled in the state level rather than the federal authorities. Capitol attack participants, on the other hand, committed their alleged acts on federal property where jurisdiction is clear. Regardless of whom the Justice Department charges with civil disorder, however, legal experts were interviewed, see the use of these once rare statutes as indicative of a shift that could make it easier for federal government to intervene when it alleges criminal activity during protests in the future. So let's just think for a second: who would that affect? who would that affect if there were federal charges being used just haphazardly whenever there was a protest against the government? Who does that affect? Well, it doesn't just affect the Trump people. It doesn't just affect the Trump people. It affects us as well. Let me see if I can find this section. Okay, so right here. Under Trump, we're seeing an unusual, actually, let me scroll down a little bit more. Okay, here we go. In early June, the National Lawyers Guild sent a letter to the White House on behalf of 90 other organizations, mostly criminal justice reform oriented, asking Biden and Garland to drop cases, 350 cases against Black Lives Matter protesters filed under Trump, arguing that they would amount to little more than perpetuating racism that you repeatedly spoke out against on a campaign trail during your confirmation hearings, respectively. Yet the White House has yet to respond. Now, there have been people who were protesting after January 6th, protesting, who were a part of Black Lives Matter protests. Now, we know many people who are joining these protests are not Black. I'm not pretending that they are. But many of these people have been prosecuted in the same angst. Because what this is being framed at in the media is that these people, these Trump people, they were anti-government. Therefore, anyone who's anti-government also has to be found and prosecuted the same way. This has implications not just for the Trump people, y'all. I mean, we've been hearing about all these stories of these white supremacist meetings. Let me tell you something. This is something that's always been the case in the United States. The KKK never left. They just kind of found new avenues to enter into. So these white supremacist meetings, that's not something new for you to be afraid of. It's not something that Trump introduced to the United States. It's always been the case. What's different, though, is that they're trying to mask that these are the people who are the enemies of the United States while using these same laws and ways that are not just going to affect them, but are going to affect us as well. Don't believe me? Okay, let's look at what the Department of Justice has been doing. Now, this just came out this week. The DOJ is creating a unit focused on domestic terrorism amid spike in threats. Now, keep in mind, by the way, this is after there was, I believe, a DOJ guidance release that they were going to also start going after anti-capitalists in wake of January 6th. Well, they're moving forward with how they're going to go after people. So the DOJ is creating a specialized domestic terrorism unit. The department's top national security official said on Tuesday, amid a growing threat from violent extremists in America. Assistant Attorney General Matthew Olson revealed the new unit while testifying in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. We have seen a growing threat of those who are motivated by racial animus, as well as those who ascribe to extremist anti-government and anti-authority ideologies. Now, let's go back to what he said. He's saying racial animus. That could easily be something flipped on us. They're also saying anti-authority ideologies. Who has an anti-authority ideology? Well, Black nationalists who do not want to be guarded over by the authorities in place. You could say that's an anti-authority ideology. You could say people who do not want the capitalist system to continue to raid their communities, to continue to enslave us, to continue to put us into the prison industrial complex. That's an anti-authority ideology. You see how easily these things translate. The DOJ already has a counterterrorism section within the National Security Division, which is led by Olson. The new unit will augment our existing approach, he says, ensure that these cases are properly handled and effectively coordinated. Now, this is something that's being done in real time. There are formations being made that are going to easily be able to be used to quell not just the Trump people, quell us as well, to stop us anytime that we organize. Yet so many of us are fighting for these things or not paying attention. We're more focused on what happened with Trump, what happened with the January 6th thing. I would dare say that the possible reason, if the FBI did infiltrate January 6th, and they're not saying that they didn't, okay, I didn't say they're not saying that they didn't do it. I would dare say that the possible reason that this could be happening is because we're entering more and more into this place where the United States wants a surveillance state. And what better justification and how better to get African people on board than to say that these white supremacists almost overtook the US government. Therefore, we must exercise more authority and more power over these people. What better reason is there? And yet again, what happened on January 6th with the main liberal blacks? They started saying, oh, this was a horrible thing. This is a threat to our Constitution. I covered some stories, of some soldiers who were like, oh, so upset about this. And so you're focusing your narrative on this is our problem. We have to face this problem. Yet at the same time, this problem could have very well been created by the same government that you're crying about, right? In which case they had an agenda that you would identify these people as your enemy. Meanwhile, those in power, the ones who are backing Wall Street, the ones who are Wall Street, those people remain unchecked. Why does CNN keep talking about January 6th, but they're not talking about the people who have been raping us repeatedly economically? Why do they focus so much on this one instance and not talk about the many policies that have been passed since then? Because CNN knows the deal. They know that they need us to talk about this so that bigger things can be done to undercut our power. That's why they're not focused on the laws that are being passed. They're only focused on the narrative that we have to get these people fighting with each other. And many of us fall for it. Many of us fall for it. I've fallen for it in the past. Luckily, I haven't with this instance, but I've fallen for it in the past and seeing certain things being pushed in mainstream media and thinking that, okay, this is a problem because these white people over here are coming against us in this way. And you spend so much time fighting these people. Meanwhile, global capitalism is literally depleting us on every single step. I mean, going unchecked, that's the biggest problem. Who's checking them? No one's checking them. We're so busy trying to check these low-hanging fruit and no one is checking these people. Now, I want to switch gears to talk a little bit just about this whole issue of critical race theory, because that's just another small instance that I'm seeing our people also fall for we're falling for the same tactics. Let me first say, when it comes to this, it is not me saying that if a school institution wants to talk about the truth about what happened to enslaved Africans, good, great. I don't rely on those institutions to teach my child. Frankly, I don't believe there will ever be a true institution that's controlled by whites that will be true to the level of the history of what's happened to us. Even if you talk about all the terrorism, are you going to talk about the solution? The solution is not, hey, all these things were done to your people, therefore integrate into America. That's the solution that will be told to our children. Instead, the solution would be that these things are being done where our people are powerless, our people need power. But how many of them are going to talk about power, us being able to exercise power over ourselves and over our systems? They're going to stay away from that because they're safe with just telling us that, hey, we lynched you, we enslaved you, we did all these horrible things to you, we're sorry, right? Therefore, come join our America, right? That's what's being told to us. So that's not my concern. My concern is not getting white people to teach the curriculum correctly at this particular point. It would be nice, if you did some more truth and stop indoctrinating. But guess what? Even if you continue indoctrination, I'm just going to use your indoctrination as a way to tell my child about the true nature of this country. I don't need any assurance from you that you're going to do it for me as a parent, as an activist. We should be talking about how can we organize to teach our children together. We have so many entities of social media that we can expose our children to, YouTube channels that are very much Black power leaning. We could do that on our own without relying on them. So their issue that they're telling me is my issue. They're telling me critical race theory, you need to fight for this. I'm not fighting for that. But CNN says we need to fight for this. But this Republican lawmaker is trying to block it. This Republican lawmaker is trying to drop it. And keep in mind, So CNN, they're, the MSNBC, the liberal people, they're telling us these people are trying to stop them from teaching critical race theory. On the other side, if you ever watch the conservative networks, and you should, because you should know what everyone is saying, they're saying, oh, they're trying to tell your children that your children, they should be feel guilty for being white. They're trying to create racial animus. So you see how they're kind of setting us up. We're fighting because we want you to tell the truth. The conservatives are like, we don't want to tell the truth. Meanwhile, what's happening in the background? Lots of things that are going unchecked because we're so distracted with the fact that we shouldn't even be relying on the state to teach our children. The state will never adequately teach our children because they're not going to teach them the solution. The solution is Black power, right? They're not going to teach them that. Instead, they're going to find a way to make it fit into their narrative. And regardless, I'm not fighting some conservative. I don't care enough about this issue to fight you on this. I have bigger things to fight. But again, that's how they keep us going. This is just a really quick example of this. The Black Mississippi senators who walked out in protest over the critical race theory ban. It says Black lawmakers walked out in protest Friday and withheld their votes as Mississippi Senate passed a bill that would ban schools from teaching critical race theory. The superintendent of education said that he has said critical race theory is not being taught in Mississippi schools, and legislators have offered no evidence to show it is. Yet Republicans said that the theory teaches victimhood, while Democrats said the ban could squelch discussion of Mississippi's racist history. Now, I only want to talk about this because it's very interesting that all these Black lawmakers walked out of this discussion. Have they walked out of so many other discussions that pertain to our people? Did they walk out on things that pertaining to the mass incarceration system? Did they walk out on things pertaining to banks that are predatory lending? Do they walk out on the many types of police brutality issues that happen whenever there's policing bills in place? Why walk out now? I mean, frankly, if y'all want to walk out, that's good. But over critical race theory, meanwhile, there's other issues, and we don't hear this same type of angst to show and demonstrate that you are opposed to these policies. But yet, here we are. We're going to celebrate this and celebrate them walking out on something that has been fed to us by the mainstream media, and they've told us this is our problem. Our problem is not that our people are being enslaved into the capitalist system. Instead, our problem is that the capitalist system needs to teach our children our history rights. Makes absolutely no sense. Now, I'm just gonna close out this by just talking about the global ways that these things happen, and hopefully we can. And I'll actually try to answer some questions if there are any before we end out. But this might seem like it just pertains to Africans in the U.S. This pertains to Africans everywhere. Now, I started off the channel, started off the stories. One of the stories I talked about was China, how China's being used, right? I talked about last week how China is not, in my reading of what their actions are, they're not a friend to Africans. They're not about the tearing down of the neocolonial states. They're partnering with the neocolonial states. But are they the West? Are they making these same types of loans? Are they putting the same type of stipulations on the loans? No. Now, despite that, though, many of us have been so outraged by China that we have put our focus on China. Now, I'm not against putting your focus on the people who are partnering with the neocolonialists. By all means, please do. But do you see how it kind of is weird that some Africans, and I'm talking about like many stories where you hear of Africans who are so appalled by the Chinese presence in Africa, they will burn down their factories and things like that. But you never hear about these same things happening to the European colonizer. Do you understand why the anti-Asian sentiment would be beneficial to the European colonizers? Well, of course you do. You understand that the IMF and the World Bank want to make sure that they're the ones lending to you. You understand that the military presence of China and Russia, obviously, but China is the main word that people focus on. You understand how that military presence is a threat to outside, to European military presence and United States military presence. You understand that. Yet on the continent, there's a certain venom that I notice against Chinese people that I don't notice against the European colonizer. So I just want to caution our people. be careful, whenever we're jumping on issues that are being fed to us. Because if you don't know, the American press, the European press, they are flooding the airwaves, whatever, with this whole idea China's colonizing Africa. Trevor Noah did a whole section on it, got millions of views on the Daily Show. They're flooding us with this narrative, right? Now, again, we don't aspire to a dependency on China. We aspire to independence and liberation, but let the West and China fight it out on their own. If you have the same venom towards the Chinese, if you apply that same venom to the European people, we would be in no problem, right? But yet the people are not, we're confused when it comes to Europeans. We're used to them colonizing us. We're used to them dominating us. We're just not used to Chinese people doing it. So that's just me trying to say that this is not just being done as far as us in the United States, is being done all over the world. So I don't see any questions from anyone, but I'm going to, end out now and just say that, again, let's just be careful and understand that we're being used. And let's learn our lesson from the Civil War. Nothing's changed for Africans since the Civil War, because we allowed some people who had not our best interest in mind to, quote unquote, liberate us. And now our people are still in chains. If we want to be free, we're going to have to be free totally. And that means that we don't allow CNN, MSNBC, New York Times to tell us what our issues are. We inform the public what our issues are. We organize together and we inform the dominant society as far as what our issues are. And I'm telling you, your number one issue is not these low-level white supremacists. Be prepared for them. Don't get me wrong. I believe that we need to be understanding this right to bear arms thing the same way that they do. Be prepared for them. Be suspicious of them. But don't put your energy and your focus on them. Focus more on the global system that is continuing to oppress our people. So with that, thank you all for watching. I will see you all in the next live stream.